Hey there, I'm Sara Porritt, and you are tuning into the Hear Us Roar podcast. Join me for inspired conversations with Asian women, chatting about how ideas and passions can ignite truly transformative journeys. On today's episode, you'll learn how Diana Lee went from selling cars to pay for college to building an $18 million ad business for dealerships. Diana founded Constellation Agency in May of 2016, a company focused on producing hyper-targeted digital ads for auto franchises. She started this two-person operation driving from dealership to dealership, pitching her business door to door. While Diana knew that she had an amazing idea that was going to revolutionize personalized advertising in the digital age, she also acknowledges that all of us are human, and we experience this thing called fear of failure. In my conversation with her, this spicy 5'3" powerhouse reminds us all about the power of taking action.
Just do it. That's it. Just execute, and you'll figure it out because you're smart enough and you have resources, and all those things will come into play when you need them. But just start.
And not only did Diana start, she was unstoppable. Today, Constellation Agency produces advertising for more than 700 auto franchises across the country, working with everyone from BMW to Audi to Jaguar and even Volkswagen. Chances are, if you purchased a car from one of those companies based on a digital ad that you saw, you may already be a fan of Diana's work. In 4 short years, Constellation is now one of the top 10 fastest growing women-led companies in the US, as highlighted by Inc. magazine. And Diana has even gone on to launch a nonprofit called Do Good Auto Coalition, focused on uniting dealerships from across the country to provide food and supplies to those in need. I'm sure you're just as excited to talk to Diana as I am, so without further ado.
Thank you so much for having me on the podcast. So I immigrated here from Korea in 1975. I was 5 years old when we came, and we lived in sort of the slums of Philadelphia when we first arrived. And, you know, I grew up in a 1-bedroom apartment with my sister and my parents. And, you know, my parents worked all of the time. So we were pretty much moving every couple of years to a better situation and a better apartment. And by the time I got to high school, we finally made it to the suburbs in Pennsylvania, Springfield, Pennsylvania.
What was it like growing up in Philly back in, the 70s and 80s? Did you feel like you fit in? Was it pretty diverse where you lived?
Yeah. So back then we lived in the slums. And so there were a lot of Asians, but there were also a lot of African Americans, and there were a lot of Spanish. And back in those days, they didn't actually play together. We would get into like fights. I remember like riding on, my friend's bike, and they were giving me a ride. And we were always worried about our bikes being stolen or our stuff being stolen. And there was a lot of like turf wars back then. So, I remember getting robbed a lot. I would come home and it was as if walking in from like a movie set, and you would leave your house and all the furniture would be there, and you come back from school and you open the door and everything was empty, and like the curtains would just be blowing from the wind that was coming in from the windows. And I remember walking in going, I must have gotten the wrong apartment. This can't be my apartment.
Gosh.
There's nothing here. Yeah, and that happened a lot. I mean, my parents didn't have a lot of money, obviously, back then. So I didn't get a lot of gifts. And because I was born really close to Christmas, I would always get like one present every year. And that would get stolen as well. And so it was like this sad thing that like, I would get like one toy. And right after Christmas, that's when we would always get robbed, because I think they would know that we would have gifts. And that's when, the gifts were gone at the same time. But yeah, that was the upbringing I had.
That's so disheartening. being the child of a South Korean immigrant and really not being born with a silver spoon in your mouth, did witnessing all of these hardships and your parents living a life of struggle, but also you having experienced all of these things, did that have any impact on you and sort of the decisions that you've made to bring you to where you are now?
Absolutely. I mean, I think it had everything to do with it. And, I think a lot of people would probably say, my parents are exactly the reason that I got here. And there's so many different aspects of the story that I would tell you. Is like, in one aspect, I saw my parents struggle and I saw my parents really work really hard, 15-hour days. And I was a latchkey kid. So they would leave at 4 a.m. and many nights or days they would come back at 9 o'clock at night from the age that I was 5 years old. And the other aspect, I felt like, I was pretty neglected at times. And then the other part was my parents are Asian. So nothing was ever good enough, right? There's a lot of criticism that our families actually give to our children. And it usually is some form of negative reinforcement. So I had a lot of that going on as well in my family household, that there was stress and there was a lot of negative reinforcement. So all of those things were contributors to sort of how I pushed myself, I think, harder than what was probably normal.
I totally hear you. I feel like I still have that feeling of wanting to impress my parents and still feeling like I'm failing in some capacity. And I acknowledge that a lot of that's probably just my own mental processes psychologically. But I hear you. That's definitely a driving force that can stick with you for quite some time. You had a fascinating career your freshman year of college. Not a lot of Asian Americans held that particular job title.
Yeah, so I got to college and I will tell you that I was a bit of a mess. I mean, it wasn't like I was a straight A student and, striving to be the best. I was pretty much kicked down by that point in my life. And I just remember I felt like in high school, going into college, I had so much pressure to succeed, I think, from my parents and being an Asian immigrant here. And because of that, I never felt like, I was ever good enough. And so going into college, I was a bit of a mess, kind of realizing that I'm not going to be good enough. And so at that point, all I knew was I needed to make some money during college because I didn't come from an environment where my parents could pay for everything. And at the end, watching them work so hard, being robbed, I would say probably about 10 times, and realizing that my mom was also at gunpoint a few times in her life at the stores and the convenience stores that they ran, I didn't want to keep relying on my parents to pay for my education and pay for things because I just thought that they were overextended in every capacity. So during the summer of my freshman year, going into sophomore year, there was an ad in a newspaper for a greeter that was right down the street at a local car dealership. It was a Toyota car dealership from where I was going to college. So I applied and I got the greeter position. And by then I was still somewhat shy. And so I would greet people. And within 2 weeks of actually being there, my manager came up to me and said, look, it's a Saturday. It's super busy. We've got customers all over the place walking the lot. You're not a greeter anymore. Go over there
That's
and
your
try
moment.
to help them.
You seized it.
Yes. And I was like, what? He's like, you're a salesperson now. Go and sell some cars. And I was like, okay, I don't know what I'm doing, but I'll do it. And so that's how I sort of learned. I just greeted people. I talked to them. Every question they had, I would go back to the desk and ask the manager, what do I say next? And there was a lot of back and forth in the conversations that I would have. And then they would send in what was called a closer if it got closer to a deal, and they would go in and close the deal. So that's how I learned.
And how did your parents feel about this chosen career of yours your freshman year?
I think by then I always felt like I was somewhat of a disappointment to my parents. I was a second child. They kind of gave up. They were like, okay, my sister went to Tufts and she was way smarter than me. She was, I think, top 5% of our high school. And so there was a lot of just thinking, okay, well, she's just going to survive and that's what's going to be. And so, I told my parents and they were like, what are you doing? What are you doing? And they were so angry. They said, you know what? You're supposed to go to law school. We talked about this. Your sister's going to be a doctor and you're going to be a lawyer. Why are you at a car dealership?
Isn't it great how our parents map out our lives for us? It's like by the time you're 32.
It's true. It's true. They knew that we were going to marry certain people.
Oh, yeah. And if the picture didn't match up, you heard it.
Yes. Yes. You're shaming the whole family by the decisions that you're making.
And you really did overwork because you were doing your job at the car dealership even when school started. So you were essentially doing double duty. I'm sure that was really, really hard to manage and excel at doing both things when you have so much going on all at once. What did you study in school?
I was a philosophy major.
Great major. Great major, Diana. Good choice.
Thank you. But it just didn't make a sense. A philosophy major working at a car dealership. So it didn't make any sense, but.
And Diana, what exactly did you do with that degree?
I don't really think I was so thinking about ethics at the time and I was thinking about theology. My parents were devout Catholics that went to church almost every single day. And so there was a lot of seeking about who I am, what I wanted to be, what the world was about, what moral decisions I needed to make, especially in the car business that I was in. So there was a lot of those things going through my head. And that's probably why I picked that type of major.
I'm not surprised because you still carry such a wonderful level of curiosity. And just this curiosity and your kindness combined, and we'll talk about it a little bit later, I think has even led you into some of the nonprofit work that you've done. It's really looking at, within society, where is there a need and a challenge. And I love that about you.
Oh, thanks so much, Sara. I mean, it's really weird because my husband and I always talk about this deep sense of insecurity in me, right? Because I think when people meet me, they're like, oh my gosh, she's so sure of herself. But it's actually the opposite. Mm-hmm. And I don't really talk about it to most people, so they only see the surface. But, it didn't come from a good place. My drive to succeed, which is unhealthy, I think, in many aspects at times, didn't come from the best place of security and health and all those types of things.
How lucky are we to get a rare peek behind the emotional curtains of this amazing woman? I was really touched by Diana's willingness to open up to me about her vulnerabilities. It really goes to show that how you feel in any particular moment in time isn't indicative of how you'll feel the next day or how successful you'll become. All any of us can do is attempt introspection, put one foot in front of the other, and just try. So how did this philosophy major go on to launch a wildly successful advertising firm? Let's find out.
So sort of how this all linked from the car business and how it sort of evolved into marketing and launching Constellation had a lot to do with the fact that when in the car business back, in 1989, it was really hard for women and especially minorities to make a mark. And so I think there was only 2 women in the dealership at the sales level that I met, and even fewer minorities doing what we were doing back then in the auto industry. But I moved up fairly quickly in the auto industry, and then shortly at the age of 22, I became a finance manager. And finance managers make quite a bit back then. It was a 6-figure job. And so, I started, selling loans to banks and working with customers to get the best deals and finance rates and all of that. But in the car business, because it is a tough business and I've gone through a lot, being in the business and, whether it was harassment or it was intimidation, all those types of things, I sort of needed to be an alpha in that environment. Mm-hmm. And so I'll tell you a story because it's a pretty funny one. But so when I was a finance manager and I started in New York City at a new job, I remember that a salesman came up to me that was double my age. So I'm still in my 20s. And he throws a file at me and he says, "Girl, build this out." This is my first job. This is my first day on the job. Mm-hmm. So he walks out to the showroom and I grab the file. I run after him. Now everybody in the showroom is there and they could all see me. And I ripped it into tiny little pieces in front of him. And I threw it up in the air and I said, "You made a mistake. You better start over again."
That's fierce. That's a scene from a movie, though.
Well, I walked away and I was like, I'm going to get fired right now, but I don't care, and the guy looked at me, but everybody else looked at me, all the men. And they were like, okay, we're not messing with her. Yes, that's it. She's going to be a total bitch and we are not messing with her. And so, but that was what it was. And so somebody said to me when I told this story one time, he said, "It sounds like you were in prison and you wanted to show them that you're the alpha." And I was like, yeah, that's what the car business was. You had to be the alpha and I was little and I was small and I was young and I was Asian. And the way they were looking at me is she's going to be subservient. So I had to go the extreme opposite to make sure they realized I was never going to be subservient. And so from there, after fighting that battle for so long, I realized, once I got married, I'm going to go to the consulting side because now I have all this retail industry experience and now I can go to the consulting side. And I started to hit up auto manufacturers to get consulting jobs. And that's when that came in. So I did a lot of consulting in my lifetime. I did it for General Motors and Ford and BMW and Rolls-Royce and so on and so forth. And then finally, I worked for an agency that basically said, hey, we, back in 2008 and 2009, almost went under. And because we almost went under, we want you to bring in business that's outside of auto. And that's when I brought in the Pfizer pharmaceutical business. And it was about meningococcal disease. And at the time, they were looking for a social media global campaign of research. And so at that point, that's when I met Matt Woodruff. And I was 47 at the time. And so I met Matt, who's my co-founder, and he's our chief product officer, and he's 20 years younger than me. And so during that time, my husband said, "Look, you're 47. If you don't do it now, you're not going to do it. So don't tell me that everybody else stinks and that you could do it better, faster, stronger, and you would do it this way and that way because you talk about all of it. But at the end of the day, you're never going to take a risk and you're just going to regret it. And so here's it. You can only really take risks when you're in your 20s." And he said, "You can only take risks when you're closer to your 50s because your kids are growing up. And at this point, we have enough foundation to be able to support the risk. So if you're not going to do it now, you're never going to do it." And at that moment, I said, he's right. I'm going to do it now. And that's when we launched Constellation.
Let's dig into what Constellation Agency is and what the first few weeks and months were like when you were building it out.
Oh my gosh, Sara, it was so stressful. I cannot tell you, it was so stressful.
I'm not surprised.
The first year and a half, it was probably the most stressful. And you can ask Matt or any of the people on my team that basically, joined at the earlier days. I was really pretty set in making sure that we did not take money. And that was why it was so much more stressful. I think there's a lot of startups that are like, okay, let's go raise money. I never thought that. And the reason is because I was like, we got to prove that this thing could work before raising any money, that I'm just not going to fund or find investors and even put more pressure on ourselves if we don't actually have a real plan, a pilot that we can actually launch. So Matt goes on vacation the first week and he's like, look, Diana, I already had a holiday set up. So I'll be out Thursday to Tuesday. I'll be gone. And when I come back, we'll start executing. So I said, okay. So he leaves. And of course, I go on the road and I start my selling. By the time he comes back, I sell 7 contracts.
You're a beast.
No, I said, before you go, help me make a PowerPoint. Just make me a PowerPoint.
Diana, can I just say, and that has nothing to do with the show, but I need you in my corner because when I'm ready to launch something, I need to go into my Diana beast mode.
I will help you with anything you want, Sara.
Thank you.
Anything you want. Obviously, the journey was super stressful. And so I sell these 7. And this is like, I'm not kidding you. This is like the first years of a Constellation Agency, all the way to actually how we operate now, right? So I'm always on this hyper fast mode. So this is the very big difference between me and Matt. And his sister actually works for Constellation and she was our first employee. But she always said, Matt would take forever to actually make sure everything was perfect, right? And now he's partners with somebody that would throw everything against the wall to see if it was going to stick or not, right? And so we're like exact polar opposites in how we approach things. But then the pressure is I would oversell and overcommit, and then he would have to try to fulfill all of those things. So he would have to run as fast as I was running, but behind everything that I was selling. So in the very beginning days, we wore multiple hats. I was the QC, I was the salesperson, I was the account person, I was the person that basically handled all of the operations, so put all the operations in. And he was the one that did strategy, he did the creative, he did the campaign launching, media buying. I mean, like, it was crazy. And we launched Constellation Agency from his apartment. So once I realized we're going to development and we didn't have any development skills, me or Matt, we were like, okay, what are we going to do here now? Neither one of us know anything about development. And by that point, we were at a WeWork office and it was like a 4-person office. In that first office, our neighbors were GitHub. And GitHub is a developer company that does, development for many companies globally around the world. So I said, Matt, get up. And he's like, where are we going? And I said, we're going to GitHub. I said, you got some cookies or something?
The universe is conspiring to help you. They just happen to be there. And loving your cookies.
Yes. So I walk in and all these developers are at work and they're like, look, we can't help you, but we can give you a referral that can help you. It's this guy named Vinny. And Vinny just left Big Spaceship. And Big Spaceship is a big ad tech here in New York. And he was the VP there, but he launched his own consulting firm. So we call Vinny. Vinny comes in and we hire him as a consultant. And he goes, look, I heard your story. I listened to everything that you had to say. I said, Vinny, would you be our CTO? He's like, no, I just launched a consulting company. I said, then who will be our CTO? And he goes, there's a guy. His name is Noman. He's at RGA. The problem is you will never get Noman, but Noman is the guy that you're looking for. I call Noman. I pitch. I make him come in. I meet with him. And basically Noman goes, no, not interested. Matt and I have now started development and realized it's a disaster. We don't know what they're saying. We don't know what they're talking about. These developers are completely different from us. They're a different animal. They're not speaking our language. And we're going to fail if we don't find somebody that can speak their language. So desperately, I call Noman again after 2 weeks. And I said, please just go out to dinner with me. So he said, fine. He shows up to dinner. And I sit there, I bring him to like this noodle house in New York. And I'm pitching my little heart out again. Pitch. And he looks at me and he's like, look, Diana, you're really nice, but this is not my next career move. I'm like, what do you mean? What is your next career move? He's like, I don't know. I'm going to go to Google or I'm going to go to another tech company, but this isn't it. I'm looking for something bigger. So I look at him and I go, you're the stupidest man in this world. I just insult him. And he looks at me like astonished.
Did you say that? Did that come out of your mouth?
Yeah, it came out of my mouth. I said, you're the stupidest man on this world. And he's like, what? And I'm like, you're stupid. And he's like, what do you mean? I said, look, chase your life. And all you're going to do is get your 2% to your 5% raise that you're going to get every year going from company to company, whether you stay at RGA or someplace else. That's what's going to happen to you. You're just going to keep staying there. The last 14 years, you're going to get your 2 to 5% raise. What I'm offering you is a dream of a lifetime. And I said, you know what? You're young right now in your 30s and you're thinking this stuff is going to happen to you all the time. And I'm going to tell you, this shit doesn't happen. Of all the years in my lifetime that I've lived, nobody's come to me and said, look, I'm going to make you a partner in my company. Nobody has ever said that to me in my life. I had to make it happen myself. And here I am. I'm telling you, I have the best story. And I'm telling you, you're going to be rich one day joining this story, but you're too stupid to realize it.
I dare you to say no to Diana Lee. As you probably guessed, Noman joined Constellation Agency shortly after that conversation and continues to serve as their Chief Technology Officer. Now that Diana's well on her way to conquering the ad world, her big brain and even bigger heart drove her to launch yet another entity. This one focused on creatively leveraging the resources that she now has access to give back to the community during a critical time of need.
The nonprofits lost a lot of their volunteers during COVID. And then during this time, we had huge needs of food insecurity that was happening all across the country, but especially in communities of color. Also, restaurants were all closed. Schools were all closed. So there was actually a food crisis where basically the food supply chains had broken in the U.S., meaning that there were food trucks and deliveries that were supposed to be made to restaurants or they were supposed to go to schools. But suddenly they no longer could go to those places because these places are now closed. So the food rescue nonprofit teams were saying, oh my gosh, now we have 10,000 pounds of food. It's all going to waste if we can't find cars and drivers at this point. And that's when we got involved, because by that point, we were working with 7 auto manufacturer OEMs. We already were working with 700 auto franchises here in the U.S., knowing that there's 17,500 U.S. auto franchises in the United States, and they cover every area of the U.S. I realized, oh my gosh, they have cars. So is there any way at this time of need that I could reach out to some of these dealerships and see if they would show up to help us to move the food supply? So Matt Woodruff and I went straight into action. We started calling dealerships and asking them to show up and help us move the food supply. And that's where the Do Good Auto Coalition just, from nowhere, starting in April, we started to move supplies in New York and Brooklyn and Newark and other parts of the countries that we just basically just jumped in.
I love that. It's the same sort of creative problem solving that you've always framed your business and your other ventures against, that you've kind of utilized to make this something that's really been a tremendous resource for everybody in New Jersey. Self-reflecting back a little bit, is there a thoughtful piece of advice that you'd give to Diana as a freshman in college working at the car dealership? And if so, what would that be?
I think the number one thing was love myself. I think that would be the advice that I would have given myself back then. I think that even though I tell you these stories that I was so fierce and I was in that aspect that I could be quite hard, the place it came from was also a place that I don't think that I loved myself enough. and valued myself enough. And so I believe the stories in my head, and I'm sure everybody has sometimes stories in their head that says, you're not good enough. You're not smart enough. You're not the best. You need to be liked. You're not good enough until people actually like you and until people tell you. I wish I could take back some of those things, which is like, I became Diana, but I wasn't born Diana. And I should have been happier and more proud of who I was born. And that's where I feel like I've made the mistakes in my life.
And yet we all have our own stories. You know, if you were, maybe you'll be a different Diana today. So Who knows? Who knows? So for my listeners who want to go into media or nonprofit or launch their own badass company, is there one thing that you recommend that they do tomorrow to get one step closer to their dream?
I mean, I think the one thing that I would tell everybody overall across the board, and I say this to any young person that actually starts with our company, and it's the words ask for more. And there's a reason why I say this, because a lot of times young people, they don't know how to advance their careers, right? A lot of times they start at jobs or they do things and they just do what they're asked to do, right? Everybody's just asked to do a lot of things. And there's so many bright young stars out there now. And so what I say to them, I'm like, you're just as good as everybody else. At the end of the day, you're just as smart as everybody else. The only difference is that there's going to be a group of people that don't just do what they're asked to do. Because many of us are asked to do something and we do just that. That's it. That's all we do, right? We do it. And then we're like, oh my gosh, now it's time. I can party. I can go out with my friends. I can hang out. I can go to my yoga class. I can do anything else because I did what I was supposed to do. That's great. The problem is 95% of us will do exactly that. 95% of us will do exactly what we're told to do. The difference is very few, 5% of us, I believe, will ask for more after they're done what they were asked to do. And so that's what I always say is if you want to stand out, whether it's in your environment, your work environment, or you're in whatever environment that you want to do to be successful, do what you're asked to do, but then go right back to your supervisor and ask for more. So that's the advice I would give.
Honestly, that's great advice for anyone. I mean, I needed to hear that today, so thank you for that. So what's next for you? Not just for Do Good or for Constellation. What's next for Diana?
I think that I've thought about this quite often, and it's one of these things that I've gone back and forth about, right? About like, what does retirement look like for me? Because I am 51 and I'm not saying I'm ready to retire right now, but what does the last 10 years of my career actually look like for me? And I've thought about it in pretty in depth. And now that Constellation, we've moved 7 offices because we outgrew all of the offices that we were in. Now we have offices in New York and Los Angeles. We're growing our team to almost 70 this month, and we continually are hiring. I want to get to $100 million in revenue. And that's what we're really trying to go for at this point. So I want to continue growing the top line. I want to keep continuing to grow the story. I want to do it faster than ever with our team. I think our team is super talented and the brightest and the smartest and the best and most capable people that we've chosen for our team now. And I think the momentum is there.
I'm just really happy that I even get to witness any of this, and so grateful that I got a chance to meet you. And I'm cheering you on from the sidelines, and I'm happy to, step in and more proactively cheer you on in whatever ways that I can. And just so grateful that you were able to join me in this conversation today. Thank you so much, Diana. And thank you for tuning into the Hear Us Roar podcast. If you connected with Diana's journey, please comment and be sure to hit that subscribe button. Also, pop over to www.hurpodcast.com so that you can stay up to date on all the latest episodes. It's a great way for us to keep in touch so that I can continue to encourage you to see your passions blossom. I'm your host, Sara Porritt, and until next time,